Hello, and welcome back to the Accedo Playback Podcast, the podcast discussing industry news, trends, and tech advancements in the OTT and streaming industry. I'm your host, Neil Van Zyl. Forward deployed engineering has existed in a bunch of different forms over the years, coined by Palantir in the 2010s, but the rise of AI is bringing renewed attention to the model and the role it can play in helping companies adopt and operationalize new tech. Over the last few years, the number of forward deployed engineer roles has drastically increased as organizations look to apply AI inside products and workflows. And the challenge is often less about access to tools and more about integrating them effectively into complex technical and operational environments. To discuss this further, we'll be talking to senior leaders from Accedo about forward deployed engineering in the context of AI and streaming tech. Joining us today to discuss is Edit Kovacs, VP of Europe and Latin America, and Michael Chen, VP of Operations in North America. Edit, thanks for joining.
Thanks for having us.
And Mike, good to see you again.
Always good to be back on the pod.
Let's jump right into it. So I guess before we start, we should just give it a quick definition just in case. But for anyone who isn't aware, forward deployed engineering is a hybrid software and client-facing role where instead of building products or solutions for a specific firm, the forward deployed engineer is embedded directly within a client's organization to customize, integrate, and deploy software in real-world environments. So it really is obviously a key when it comes to AI implementations, because having someone who has helped build the systems, understands them, and then launches them into your actual infrastructure is critical. Let's start here then. Forward deployed engineering has been around for a long time in different forms. Why is it becoming such a relevant topic again in the context of AI? And how is this the same or different from how Accedo has practiced over the last 20 years?
Yeah, I mean, the term isn't really new in practice. I think it's been around for a while. As you mentioned earlier, it's embedding engineers directly at customer site, typically solving problems with tech. And Palantir was actually the first to really, send this model into the real world. Back then, the intelligence agencies where they were working couldn't really describe what they needed. So instead of asking, Palantir just sent engineers directly on site. And they called those engineers later deltas, which now they're called forward deployed engineers. Accedo traditionally, we have done a lot of the same work, right? We've worked with a lot of different media and operators and broadcasting companies. Sometimes they can articulate what they needed, and other times we would work alongside them in long-standing engagements. In some cases, we would work with them for 6 months, in some cases as long as 5+ years, right? And we called it partnerships, right? We would work with them on their problems deployed in their systems and in their infrastructure, helping to develop the front end applications. But being on the front end side, you also get to see all of the stuff before it. And if there's something not working, we need to then partner with them to solve it. So I think what's changed now is that the problem is actually utilizing AI and utilizing it effectively. I think AI before, 2026, we were still focused on improving the models. But the models now in 2026, and in my personal experience as of around February, when Opus 4.6 was released, is now at a very, very advanced state where it's actually now getting something into a system and operating at the right level. That's the harder problem to solve.
Yeah, and just to add to that, the bottleneck used to be in the past couple of years the models, but now like OpenAI is releasing a model every 6 weeks or so, and you can see the same from the others as well, right? So the model is not a problem anymore. It can more or less solve a lot of the things that we've seen as a problem. But what the model cannot solve is having domain knowledge and expertise that the embedded forward deployed engineers, if you call them with the new naming convention, they can solve that. They have multiple years, and that's what we see in our teams as well. They have multiple years of experience. They know the complexity of operating in an environment where there's a lot of code to be refactored. There's local nuances, especially in my region. That has been a challenge historically within the EU and the other countries as well. There's a new law coming out every year, every other year, and someone who has that knowledge and can continuously adapt to it and the complexities that are happening every day as a result of that, that's something that AI can't do currently. And that's where like having forward deployed engineers really, really shines. And that's where we see a lot of value.
Yeah, and then, just to add to that a little bit, in the real world, it's very messy, right? In POCs and in the experimentation stage, you're often working with very stable variables that you're trying to prove something. And then as soon as you get to a real operating environment, you get messy data schemes, you have legacy infrastructure, compliance constraints, operational workflows that, let's be real, hasn't been fully documented for many years. And if somebody has built something over 10 years, that's a very, very complex system. And so it's the last mile problem, right, which doesn't get solved by getting better AI models. It gets solved by putting a person to work alongside an organization to understand what works, what doesn't work, and what form of technology needs to be applied versus, what can we keep in its automation state so that we can generate, and we'll get to it later, maybe token efficiencies, right? So that we're not adding a lot of new cost to a business and actually getting a really good return on the investment and implementation of AI.
What changes when you try to take these tools and push for production level solutions in these complex streaming environments?
Well, AI has helped accelerate that, right? So in a way, it's commoditizing building a basic app. The scaffolding, you can get the app up and running even in a matter of hours if you want to. And there's a bunch of YouTube tutorials where you can check that out. And that means that, the floor has been made convenient, right? But the ceiling, we're like, okay, how do we operate this in production at scale under very complex environments and rules and compliances? That's where like AI is still not there yet, and that's where like the domain knowledge and expertise that has been built up throughout the years, that's where that really, really helps. So that's why we see like applying AI really helps to get there, but to take it all the way to an operational app that is easy to maintain and it's working under significant load, be it a live event or just a brand new title release that is a tentpole release where you expect on your app to have like significant traffic. That's where like AI by itself is not solving the problem just yet. And also, maybe just one more point, the streaming world is very fragmented, right? There's like 10, 15 different platforms and devices that the same experience is supposed to be there and working. And yeah, some of it can be developed with AI, but there's so many complexities. Like there's certain sticks that have less memory than a printer nowadays, right? And how do you build for that compared to like an 8K TV that has a giant memory? So the domain knowledge and expertise, again, comes into tweaking and making the same experience work on low level and low end devices and the best, most newest device as well.
Yeah, I love that. You said something that I agree completely with, right? We raise the, ability to get to the floor much faster, but it doesn't mean that we've lowered the ceiling, that's needed to get to production and get into the real world. For myself, I've been in a lot of delivery, projects, getting things out over the last 10 years. And so, we can talk about that fragmentation problem you mentioned, right? The device surface area is phenomenally big, right? Especially if you're trying to get into all the different streaming platforms and have the right platforms to serve content in the right form factors. We have Roku, Fire TV, Apple TV, Android, Samsung, LG, Vizio, gaming consoles, mobile. Each of them have their own constraints, right? Runtime constraints. They have their own video player quirks, the rendering behaviors, certification requirements. And even on some of these web platforms, picking the right framework and language to deploy is key. And, we talked about memory on a Roku stick, right? How do we actually optimize for performance? And, certainly AI can help write the code, but it can't replace the engineer that knows how the Roku firmware will behave on a certain memory constraint device and what solutions will fix that, and then also can be applied to the Samsung platform for an ad insertion SDK. And certainly we want to be able to generate efficient code that can live across multiple platforms. And so those are the things that AI might not be good at solving, is that last 20% of getting to production. That ceiling is very high. And I think you'd mentioned around the complexity of integrating into systems, and we don't control some of the variables, right? For CDN configuration, DRM licensing, the adaptive bitrate logic, how they want to monetize, how they set up their telemetry and the analytics and content management. It's complicated stuff, right? It's not just generating code and seeing how fast you can get it visually working. It's having all the systems talk to each other and then maintained, and then in some cases enabling their strategy, right, to be achieved through the outcomes of these platforms. That's very complex work. And I think AI is very useful. It absolutely is. We're not saying it's not. But how do we get to that last 20%, that last mile problem, solving that? That's where I think the domain expertise still is very valuable.
How does AI and I guess more specifically just forward deployed engineering change the relationship between an internal team and an external tech partner?
So it changes fundamentally the nature of the engagement, and maybe we don't talk enough about that or haven't highlighted it enough. In a traditional service-based model, right, we have a project, we have a scope, we build it, we deliver it, we hand it over, and then that's it, we move on. Nowadays, what we're seeing is that, this is great, and it has worked in the past, but it doesn't work for the current realities and probably for the future either. Because the challenge in the past was like, okay, we need to build this thing. How do we build it? That was the challenge. Right now with AI, that's not necessarily the biggest challenge. Now the biggest challenge is like, okay, we built it. How do we keep it going? How do we maintain it? How do we evolve it even, right? And it's not just the whole system. Whatever we build with AI, even that needs some operational ownership. Think of, for example, for recommendation engine, right? You build it with AI, there's an algorithm behind it. Previously, we would have called it, you build it with machine learning. We launch it, and then that's great. But if your catalog changed in the next 3 to 6 months or even a year, that recommendation engine needs to be updated. Or if the environment changed, there's new devices, new form factors, right? It needs to be maintained. So that operating it and maintaining it is the big shift that we're seeing. This is the challenge as well. Like, it's not about like who builds it faster and cheapest. It's more like, okay, who can build it in a way that understands the realities and the complexities and the evolution and the future where you want to take the apps. And there's probably some kind of a capacity angle as well. So until now, engineers were like spending 25-40% of their time to maintain either the code or some of these workflows. AI can automate some of that. If you automate the workflows, what do these engineers do then, right? And usually we try to say like, okay, try to automate the most boring parts so the engineers can focus on more like innovative things and help to elevate the product and make it much more user-friendly, or add the factor that wows the consumers and the users, right? So if we freed up the time of these engineers, then what happens next? Well, if they don't have to worry about these outdated workflows and maintaining the code because AI takes care of it, then they can focus on like, how do we build better workflows with AI? How do they monitor and manage the different AI agents? And that's where like it's a whole new level of interesting workspace to look into. And again, the forward deployed model, it kind of tries to answer this. So it's not just like, here's a project, we build it, and that's it. It's like helping to operate and figure out these new workflows. And these forward deployed engineers are also accountable for that, accountable for specific outcomes, long term, right? It's more like a short term thinking versus the long term. We don't just build, we operate and maintain for the future.
I don't think there's much to add to that. It fundamentally changes the mindset shift and the dynamics that you need to build. The vendor delivering a project and going away that's not going to be effective in the long term. It's embedding a team, embedding an FDE into your organization. And as Edit mentioned, having them also be accountable to bringing you the outcomes, right? And 6 months from now, whatever we deployed, let's say we've created a new agentic workflow and it now augments a set of automation workflows that was very expensive to upkeep before. That's going to change in 6 months, right? And so having somebody that now understands your operations is able to bring new innovation in from the outside, right? And we work with a lot of different clients. We know that as they get very busy with their day-to-day jobs, they're not focused on the new things that are happening outside the walls of the organization. So an FDE is able to constantly bring in something new to the table, keep up with this AI evolution. And for those that participate in all the new things that get released, it's like a hamster wheel. You have to be constantly racing to pick up what's new in the industry and to learn all the new capabilities that's being released by these models and things that they wrap around it. And 6 months from now, if things change, and let's say we use the traditional old model of deploying a project, delivering it, and walking away, when that breaks, you're not going to have someone around to help you shift. And I think customize and tailor the new AI workflows to what has maybe changed or broken or needs to be fast forwarded and accelerated in a new way. And for us, I think that's where the value is. It's actually helping to maintain, to transform a business continuously, and to be trusted as partners in our language to help continuously transform their business. So that's where the value is. And these FTEs, I think, will be able to do that, right? And Accedo thinks it's very valuable to continuously operate and transform, not just build one time and walk away.
One of the interesting points that you both brought up there, but obviously on the topic of maintaining, the software engineering concept has altered a little bit here, where you are, like you said, you are automating as much as possible. You are having agents, you're managing agents where you can, and then you're trying to implement the more complex or the more interesting things yourself. But maintaining context on everything built, while you didn't necessarily build it yourself, is going to be an interesting challenge going forward. And I'm wondering if either of you have any experience with that directly, or if there's been anything specifically that we're working with the team to try and make sure that context is maintained.
So again, in this new business model, let's say, instead of focusing on the short term, but thinking long term, that's where, like, if we have engineers or teams embedded in the customer's team, that context stays with the team, right? It doesn't leave. It's there, and it can be mined for future as well, for new projects, new ideas, new innovations. And that's where we see the value, and we have seen historically as well, even before AI, because again, we have been doing this for like more than 20 years. For every major technological shift that we've seen in the past 20 years, like be it like big data, for example, the same thing happened, right? The knowledge, the embedded team model, it kept transforming the business on the long term because it was there already. It didn't have to reinvent the wheel again. When someone new comes in, it's like you're almost starting from scratch, and then you lost all of that. But if you focus on this embedded model, that knowledge stays there and can be leveraged continuously over and over again.
Yeah, and if you have knowledge of both a complex system, and that's usually what people have within an organization, and you can bring in someone that can develop that knowledge, but also have this second domain knowledge of the technology, right? Then that combination is very powerful. If they know what it means in an organization to have DRM licensing requirements and its compliance like impact across different countries or different deals that they're providing through their channels, and then how to then deploy that across an AI workflow that optimizes for it, then that is real value to them. And as they continue to evolve their systems, it's not like that piece of the business and that complexity goes away, right? If you bolt on, some new strategy, we need to maintain knowledge of what that DRM licensing, or, in some cases we can talk about, CDN latencies. We can talk about, the ad fill rates and kind of what the actual setup is for their ad monetization strategy. All of that stuff is very important. And so as someone that is, let's call it an FDE, is AI native or AI enabled, and they're very proficient in that knowledge, as they gain knowledge of an organization, they can continuously look at the different problem sets within an organization and continue to add and transform the value. And sometimes it's actually not doing the traditional things over and over again, but faster. It's about actually transforming the process. And I think it's very exciting because AI allows us to reimagine large parts of the business with brand new workflows. And it's not about doing the old workflow faster, right? I think that is a productivity gain for sure, but it's not something that is transformative. And these FDEs can build a very transformative workflow the longer they stay embedded in an organization. So, the beginning stages will, of course, be solving these micro problems, but as they are embedded and they solve the problems across different parts of the business, they can then have a deep understanding of how to reform and reshape those agentic workflows when we get to the part of trying to create, I think, autonomous work that goes ahead of the people and do a lot of that pre-processing, so everything becomes more efficient.
You both touched on this one briefly in your responses there, but how important is domain expertise and operational knowledge when you're trying to implement these systems within other firms, especially for large scale streaming platforms?
I think it's really important, right? I think a lot of people today, especially those that are rapidly skilling up their AI skills and their AI knowledge, we're going to see a lot more AI engineers, right? But the interesting cross section is, can these AI engineers solve deep domain problems, right? And I just talked about DRM, but it's not just DRM. We have recommendation engines, live events with streaming latency. We have ad insertions, maybe violating AVOD content licensing agreements in specific markets. So AI, of course, can solve, as we mentioned earlier, maybe 80% of the work up front. But then it's an understanding that deep domain knowledge that is needed to then bring something to, let's call it production or carrier grade, right? Getting to that last 20%, it's not easy. And specifically for us, we've been doing this for over 2 decades. We have operational history with a lot of these companies in a valuable, I think, problem-solving way. We haven't launched things without significant bumps in the road. And in, I think, 2019, 2020, we saw a lot of new streaming kind of projects and new brands wanting to bring their content to life through new platforms, where we were there from day zero, bringing it to production. And so we've seen all the different permutations of the problems that can come up. And those things are tough. And when we've learned them, previously, there was no AI to speed it up, right? We just had to do it manually. And part of the fun of doing it manually is you get to really see the problems for what it is, and you get to solve it, and you get to tuck that away into your treasure chest. AI, I think you don't really get to see the inside working of it sometimes. Of course, the agents go away and they work for a long time, and you get to review the work, but you don't get to struggle with the problems the way that we do for over 2 decades. And so when we get to that last 20% and we're trying to fix the problems, it's that bank of experience, that deep domain knowledge now combined with this AI engineering knowledge that really will make it that much more impactful.
Yeah, and to add to that, like all the knowledge that we have discovered over the years, it's also in some cases regional, right? It's not just the technical knowledge. In many cases, it's also domain knowledge, what is correct for this market and this region, because there's so many like regional, local laws and compliance that we need to pass, that we have learned all the nitty-gritty details and how to comply there and what we need to pay attention to, that AI doesn't necessarily know that yet. So that kind of domain expertise that is not just technical but regional as well. That's something that also adds value to these forward deployed engineers or teams that we have, and the experience that we gathered throughout these 20 years. Think of things like the EU AI Act, right? It doesn't have a crazy big impact on the streaming world just yet, but it's changing. Almost every year they push out the deadline or they add something new. And previously this happened as well. And that's something that we need to continuously pay attention to and implement as well.
Yeah, it's a great point about the region-specific challenges and regulations that impact how you're going to implement anything. I'm curious. Speaking of challenges, are there just anything else worthwhile calling out with regards to a forward-deployed engineering context when you're working in these large streaming firms? What challenges are come up that wouldn't normally come up in a standard, I guess, engineering deployment?
Yeah, I think in the standard engineering deployment, sometimes it's just focused on building, right? What are the problems of getting it built? And in the context of some of these streaming projects that we've worked on in the last 2 decades, it's how do we get the content to get to the end user screens, and what is the performance? What is the user interaction? How pretty does it look, in some cases? And then we're sorting out the problems of getting that to market. But the forward deployed engineers, of course, they're not as focused on the building part. They're actually more focused on the operating part, right? And how do we get it from looking and feeling good to now seamlessly operating at a cost-efficient rate, right? How much time can we save from manual work efforts? There are real big problems that creep up on a business, right? So let's say you're filling an ad and the ad break requires a certain profile, and if you don't get it correct, you get this little flash of a black screen, and it just does not look professional if you're going to broadcast. But how do you catch those errors manually? And even with automation, it's very tough to catch. With an agentic workflow, you can catch that, fill in the parameters correctly, and get rid of that problem. That's a problem that's not focused on in the traditional project-based setting. That's a problem that an FDE will catch. And an FDE will be able to look at those operational problems and transform a business over and over again. And we talk about the word transformation, but sometimes we think of transformation as a one-time transformation, right? But for us, it's a continuous thing. We've worked with customers. We have managed service with our customers as well. And professional services and managed service are 2 very different focuses. And managed service, we're caring about the outcomes, and we care about how that long-term outcome is played out, as opposed to this get to the market and launch type of outcome. And I think the FDE plays in the latter stages a lot more than the first.
Yeah, I see a convergence there as well with the FDEs and converging with the managed service, because the underlying ethos is the same, right? We're building for the future. We're trying to have a service rather than just a product, and maintaining it and operating it is the key. And that's kind of like the basic components of both the managed service and the FDE. So it's an interesting new world, and definitely worth paying attention to, because that's definitely the trend. Instead of just building, it's more like operating and maintaining.
It's a great point, and it's a good one to lead into our last question before we wrap up here. But how do you see the FDE role evolving as AI just becomes more and more powerful? Or like you said specifically, obviously it's at a point where it's usable today, but in 6 months or in pretty shortly, we'll be getting to the next level of workflows. So how is that FDE role going to change as we embed AI more into these software and operational workflows?
Yeah, the next wave of agentic AI is going to make this conversation look just like a warm-up. Right now, most enterprise AI deployments are assistive in nature. They help engineers and teams move faster. They automate very discrete tasks. In some cases, it stretches beyond those bounds, but certainly, we're seeing it act in more of this assistive capacity. The next evolution of AI, and we're seeing this already play out in 2026, and we're still just halfway through 2026, is these agentic workflows will become the focus, right? Allowing content metadata agents to run autonomously across 100,000 plus titles. allowing QA agents to catch regressions agentically before they even reach development teams or pre-production environments, to have ad insertion agents optimize real time based on the inventory to maximize fill rates and audience signals, right? These will be the next level of conversations that we'll be having the latter stages of this year and early into next year. And, I think when AI moves from assistive to operational, the role of these FDEs will become even more intensified. Right now they're implementing these POCs into organizations, and they're trying to break the POC stage and deliver true operational and enterprise value. Tomorrow, I think you'll be building, deploying, governing these AI agent workflows and networks inside an environment that's up and running, and it'll be significantly more complex, right? Today, we're taking it from 0 to 1 for most organizations. With these FDEs, they're just trying to draw the first value of AI in an organization. Then when it's there, I think the complexity of evolving it and compounding that and making sure that it doesn't break will be significantly more valuable. And the role of an engineer right now, a lot of it is in writing code. In the next, focus of what an FDE does, it will be about operating these systems, like these AI systems, and their decisions, like they need to go ahead of the humans, and they need to, of course, be able to give us insight into how much it costs, what the wrong decisions and the correct decisions will be, and then how do we reduce that error rate to increase the quality of those outputs.
Yeah, and I would argue this is even more valuable than the current setup, right? Because they can literally drive a whole business and generate more revenue or drive more value and more outcomes that the companies care about. So it's a bright future, an interesting one.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of interesting changes for sure. Well, Edit, Mike, thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate it. I know you guys are busy, and it was really fun to get into this topic a little bit more.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks, Neil.
Yeah, thanks, Neil.
All right, that's all for this episode. Thanks so much for listening. Big thanks to Mike and Edit for joining. And if you have any questions about the episode, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or send us an email at playback.podcast@accedo.tv. That's all, and we'll catch you next time.